On the evening of June the 13th, 1886, a king and the doctor sent to guard him walked out along the shore of Lake Starnberg. A few hours later, both men were found dead in the shallow water. The day before, his ministers had declared the king insane, stripped him of his throne, and taken him from the castle he had spent 17 years and a fortune building. He had slept in it for fewer than 6 months. This is that castle, Schloss Neuschwanstein, a fairy tale in white limestone above a Bavarian gorge, and today the most visited castle on earth. 1.5 million people a year climb the hill to photograph a dream that bankrupted the man who dreamed it. Because Neuschwanstein was never a fortress. It was theatre. Medieval on the outside. Underneath, central heating, running water, an electric bell to summon the servants, every wall inside painted with a story. A king who built a refuge from the modern world, out of the most modern technology of his age. And how that king came to die in the shallows of a lake one June evening beside the very doctor who had just declared him mad. No one has ever fully explained. This is the story of Neuschwanstein, and the king who never saw it finished. Start in the valley, a few hundred meters below the building site. Hohenschwangau, the medieval revival palace on the valley floor, is where Ludwig spent much of his childhood. Its rooms are painted with the legends of the Middle Ages, and among them, covering the walls, runs the story of Lohengrin, the Knight of the Grail who arrives in a boat drawn by a swan. A boy grew up inside those pictures, and the swan was no accident of decor, it was the heraldic animal of the Counts of Schwangau, whose land this had been. It would follow Ludwig all his life. He became king in 1864, at 18. Tall, theatrical, and already devoted to the operas of Richard Wagner. Within weeks of taking the throne, he had sent for the composer. 2 years later, reality intruded. Bavaria sided with Austria against Prussia in the War of 1866, and lost. Defeat stripped the young king of direct command over his own army and reduced Bavaria to a junior partner in the German order Prussia was assembling. For a ruler who understood kingship in quasi-mystical terms, a monarch ordained to embody a heroic German past, the humiliation cut deep. Ludwig's answer was not politics. He turned inward, toward music, theatre, and architecture, and began building a private world where his idea of kingship could still be true. The 2 journeys of 1867 to the Wartburg and to Pierrefonds showed him what that world could look like. He already had the site, the rock above his childhood home, clearly visible from its windows, waiting. He set it down himself, in a letter to Richard Wagner.
It is my intention to rebuild the old castle ruin near the Perlat Gorge in the authentic style of the old German knights. The location is one of the most beautiful to be found, holy and unapproachable, a worthy temple for the divine friend who has brought salvation and blessing to the world.
The divine friend was Wagner. The temple would be Neuschwanstein. Look closely at who drew the first pictures of Neuschwanstein. Not an architect. Christian Jank, a stage-set painter from the Munich Court Theatre, produced the founding images, and it shows. This castle was designed as a view before it was designed as a building. Architects then had to make the scenery buildable. Eduard Riedel first, Georg von Dollmann from 1874, and finally Julius Hofmann, who would complete the work between 1886 and 1892 after its patron was gone. On September 5, 1869, the foundation stone was laid on the spur above the Perlat. Ludwig called the project New Hohenschwangau Castle. The name Neuschwanstein only attached itself after his death. Almost immediately, the plans began to grow. Ludwig supervised everything personally, revision after revision, and each revision made the castle larger and more expensive, until a relatively modest design had swelled into a 3-winged complex crowned with towers. Nothing about the construction was medieval. Under the pale limestone cladding sits a brick core. A steam-powered crane hauled stone up the rock. Steel framing carries the throne hall. This was advanced 19th century engineering, dressed in Romanesque costume, and at 65 meters, Guinness World Records lists the result as the tallest castle in the world. Height, though, was never the point. Completeness was, and completeness never came. More than 200 rooms were planned, around 15 were finished. A Moorish hall intended below the throne hall was dropped after Ludwig's death, and the structure meant to anchor the entire composition, a great keep with a chapel at the heart of the upper courtyard, was never built at all. Stand in that courtyard today, and you are standing inside a missing building. The castle on the postcards is a torso. But inside that torso, Ludwig built some of the strangest rooms in Europe. Step inside, and the program becomes clear. 3 heroes from Wagner's operas rule these walls: Tannhäuser the poet, Lohengrin the Swan Knight, and Parsifal, King of the Grail. Ludwig identified with all 3, and the finished rooms were built to hold their stories. Begin with the throne hall, the strangest room in the castle and the most revealing, because it is not a hall for holding court. It is a church, modelled on Byzantine sacred architecture. With the All Saints' Court Church in Munich as a reference, it rises through 2 floors of the Palace. Its gilded murals show Christ, the 12 apostles, and 6 canonized kings. The floor is a mosaic of animals, plants, and the cosmos. Kingship, the room argues, is a holy office, a mediation between God and the world. At the northern end, a church-like apse waits for the throne itself. It was never installed. The room built to enthrone sacred monarchy has stood empty at its center ever since. 1 floor up is the Singers' Hall, at 270 square meters, the largest room in the castle, a recreation of the famous hall at the Wartburg, where legend set the contest of the minstrels. Its murals, though, skip the contest and tell the Grail quest of Parsifal instead. At the western end stands a raised stage framed by 3 arcades and painted as a forest, the Singer's Bower. Ludwig imagined performances here. None took place in his lifetime. The first came in 1933, on the 50th anniversary of Wagner's death, and the hall still hosts occasional concerts today. His private rooms carry the same intensity at smaller scale. In the bedroom, more than a dozen woodcarvers spent several years on the neo-Gothic oak, and the murals tell the doomed love story of Tristan and Isolde. The study is painted with scenes from the Tannhäuser saga. Between study and salon, Ludwig had his builders insert an artificial stalactite grotto with coloured lighting and a small waterfall, a cave inside a palace, and the salon beyond belongs to Lohengrin and to the Swan, which repeats through the castle like a signature carved in oak, woven into fabric, painted onto walls, glazed onto tiles, standing at once for Wagner's opera, for the old counts of Schwangau, and for Ludwig's private ideal of purity. Then you open a service door and the 19th century pours in. Running hot and cold water throughout, flush toilets, forced air, central heating, a dumbwaiter connecting the kitchen to the dining room 3 floors above, electric bells for the servants, and a telephone line. The most convincing medieval fantasy ever built ran on technology that most public buildings of its day could not match. Now the money. Ludwig paid for Neuschwanstein from his own resources, not the Bavarian treasury, a distinction he insisted on, and one that ruined him. By 1885, his debts had reached 14 million marks, and he was planning further castles, not fewer. When his cabinet refused more credit, the government moved against the king himself. In June 1886, a commission of psychiatrists declared Ludwig incapable of ruling. None of them had examined him directly. The finding was assembled at a distance, from testimony and reports, and its medical value has been argued about ever since. He was deposed and taken into custody at Berg, on the shore of Lake Starnberg. On the evening of June 13, 1886, one day after losing his throne, Ludwig walked out along the lake with the doctor who had certified him. Hours later, both men were found dead in the shallows. The official record says suicide. The evidence is incomplete, and the case has never been formally resolved. Doubters have pointed to the shallow water and to a king who was known as a strong swimmer. Defenders of the verdict point to his despair. The sources do not settle it, and honest history leaves it there, contested and probably permanently so. Years earlier, Ludwig had written a line that reads now like an epitaph.
I wish to remain an eternal enigma, to myself and to others.
In death he got his wish, and Richard Wagner, the man the whole castle honoured, had died in 1883 without ever seeing it. Ludwig followed 3 years later, his castle still wrapped in scaffolding. What happened next is the sharpest irony in the whole story. 6 weeks after Ludwig's death, the Prince Regent ordered his private refuge open to paying visitors. The most reclusive building in Europe became a public attraction almost overnight, and the crowds repaid the construction debts in full by 1899. A castle built against the modern world turned out to be a modern business of the first order. Its 20th century had a darker chapter. During the Second World War, a Nazi organization called the Innersatsstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg used Neuschwanstein as a depot for art, looted from occupied France. Allied forces recovered the works at the war's end. Then came the apotheosis. Walt Disney is widely said to have drawn on Neuschwanstein for Sleeping Beauty Castle at Disneyland, and whether or not that debt is direct, the silhouette of white towers against the Alps became the world's shorthand for the storybook castle. For years, the palace administration counted roughly 1.4 million visitors a year, up to 6,000 a day in high summer, filing through scheduled 30-minute tours in rooms built for a single occupant. Recent counts run nearer 1.1 million, while the staterooms are restored. Since 2017, conservators have worked room by room, stabilizing murals and textiles worn by the crowds, aiming to preserve the castle's authentic condition, imperfections included, rather than produce a polished replica. Recognition of a different kind came on July 12, 2025, when UNESCO inscribed Neuschwanstein on the World Heritage List, together with Ludwig's other buildings, Linderhofer, Chiemsee, and the King's House on Schachen. The committee's reasoning would have pleased him. His palaces were honoured as outstanding examples of 19th-century historicist architecture, romantic vision fused with advanced engineering, each set deliberately into its landscape. The fantasy, it turns out, was the achievement. So what is Neuschwanstein? Not a medieval castle. Underneath, it never pretended to be one. Not a folly either, whatever his ministers believed. It is one of the last great statements of European Romanticism, built in stone by a king who preferred his century's dreams to its politics, and it reads today exactly as designed, as theatre. If you go, cross the marine Brücke above the Perlat Gorge for the classic view of the south facade, and book your tour well ahead. Summer tickets sell out fast. The full written guide, with current prices, transit options, and every source behind this episode, is linked in the description below. And if castles with stories like this one are your kind of history, subscribe. The StoneKeep Atlas archive already holds nearly 100 of them, from the Rhine to the Loire, with more episodes on the way.